Okay, so this is our topic for today, challah from divided dough. Challah from divided dough, and it actually has inside two smaller topics. First, what happens if we have two small doughs? Can they connect and together and become obligated in challah? And we'll see different options. Both of them are from the same kind, or different flavors, different people. Can they connect and become like one dough? In the beginning, I thought that this question isn't so relevant, but actually I'll give an example in just a moment where we might meet this question quite often. When we make a few small doughs, and we'll give in a second an example. How do we connect two small doughs? That's how do we do it? And another topic which I didn't write here is if we have one big dough, and later on, obviously, we'll explain what a big dough and what a small dough is. But if we have one big dough and we're going to divide it, okay, separate it into a few smaller doughs, is this obligated in challah or no? And as we'll see, also this is quite a relevant question. Let's begin from an example. Purim, Purim is around the corner. And for Purim, especially here in Memphis, we like to do a lot of mishlochei manot. Last year, my wife baked, before even thought about COVID. So my wife, together with the Bat Amigels, they baked, I think if I remember correctly, 160 small cakes. So each batch of cake didn't have so much flour in it, but all of the batches together had quite a bit of flour. And since we started baking a bit before Purim, we kept all of the small cakes inside the freezer for about a week or two until we were ready to deliver it on Purim. And here comes the question. We have many small batches. Each batch doesn't have enough flour to become obligated in challah. But the question is, if I made those batches now together, does the freezer make those batches together? So this is a question we might ask. Another similar question is, sometimes we make cookies and from different kinds of cookies, and Monday we make one cookie and Sunday we make a different kind of cookies, and we put them together in the same box, the same container. All of them together have an amount to be obligated in challah. Do they become obligated in challah from the fact they come together? So this is a very common question. Another common question on the other side is, sometimes we make challah, a big dough, let's say a 5-pound dough of challah, and we think we'll make now for dinner, we will make pizza, and afterwards from half of the dough, and the rest of the dough we'll add a bit of sugar in it and make from it rogalachim, or make from it bobkas, or whatever. So we have here one dough which we're planning to divide it, and we're planning to make it into challah, into small challah. Is it obligated?
Rabbi?
Yeah.
May I interrupt you to ask questions?
Yes. So of course, yeah. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Okay, feel free to ask. Since it's the last session, so I didn't even, sorry for that, I didn't even say it, but just used it from the beginning. If there's any questions, it shouldn't be a talk of one way talk. It's supposed to be a question. If you have questions, just feel free to ask. If I'm going.
Okay, so I have not been able to attend your previous. I've had conflicts on Wednesday nights, but the question that I have is, when do you measure? Do you measure the dough before you bake it in order to know how much to separate, or whether to separate, or whether to say a bracha, or do you make it like after you?
That's actually a great question, and the Shulchan Aruch and the other rabbis discuss it. So it's a great question, and we'll answer it in just a few moments. Okay, so when do we measure the challah? So let's begin. We mentioned that we have a minimum size for challah, and we said big dough, small dough. So what do you mean by big dough, small dough? So the Mishnah in Masechet Challah, the Mishnah in Challah says, 4 רבעים קמח חייבים בחלה. Okay, 4 quarters, 5 quarters or 5/4 of a kav. A kav is a measurement of flour obligated in challah. So we can see from this Mishnah two things, and one of them answers your question. The first thing is that we have a measurement, whatever measurement it is, 5/4 of a cup, okay, whatever measurement it is. The second thing we see here that we measure it by the flour. Okay, so we measure it by the flour, and it's a volume that is measured by the flour. So let's start from the second part. If I made a challah and it rose, okay, so it doesn't matter if it rose. It goes by the amount of flour that I had. Okay, so if I make a dough, and usually a dough for challah, I think rises about double the amount, more or less. That's how it's supposed to rise. So we don't measure it by how much it rose at the end. Rather, we measure how much the flour was at the beginning, and that's how we measure it. So that answers that. And then we have the bigger question of what is this measurement? We have 5 measurements of a kav. What is it, a kav? How much is it? How much is a kav? And that is an argument of rabbis, and we have different opinions, and we measure it in volume, and flour changes its volume depending on how much it was stuffed, and so flour can really change its volume. That's why we have what I wrote here at the bottom of the page, a custom, at least out of Israel, that from 2.5 pounds and more, we separate challah, we take challah, and we don't say a bracha unless we have at least 5 pounds or just under 5 pounds of flour. Okay, and as we mentioned, and as you asked, so we measure it by the flour. Okay, so as soon as we have 5 pounds of flour, we separate the challah. Okay, so that's just to define what is the amount which is obligated in challah. And we said 5 pounds we separate with a bracha, with a blessing, 2.5 pounds without a blessing. 2 small doughs. Now we're going into our main topic. What happens when we have 2 small doughs of challah? Okay, if I'm making, for example, 2 pounds, and next to it 2 more pounds. And we'll start from the Mishnah in Challah, since that's the source, and it gives them that's the base halacha. So the Mishnah talks about 2 women that were doing, each one was doing a kav, which means each one was doing a small amount, which doesn't make it obligated in Challah. And we're talking here about 2 women specifically, and the doughs, both of the doughs touch each other. Okay, even if it's from the same kind, both of them are making challah from wheat, both of them are making the same kind of challah. So pturim, they're exempt from taking challah. They do not need to take challah since it is 2 women. But continues the Mishnah, v'zman shem shel isha achat. If it belongs to one person, one woman, just that's a common for people who used to bake challah. Also today it's woman, but it doesn't matter if it's a man or woman. So if it belongs to one person and min b'mino, both of them are the same kind, okay, both of them are the same species, so chayav, it's obligated in challah. And we'll soon see what does it mean, min b'mino. Shelo b'mino, if it's 2 different kinds, so it's patur from taking challah. So we can see here the general rule. First, we saw here the Mishnah talked about touching each other. Okay, if we have 2 doughs, for example, both are from the same kind, both from the same person, both the same kind, both the same person, but it's in 2 different places of the house. Okay, it's in 2 different areas of the house. They don't connect or reconnect to become obligated in challah. They need to have maybe touch each other, be close to each other. We'll see soon more exactly how, but there need to be some sort of connection in order to see them as one. That's the first thing. It has to have some sort of connection. Second, there needs to be a connection of the kind and of the who it belongs to. Or in other words, to make it maybe more simple, it needs to be types of challah, of dough, that we don't mind if they get mixed up with each other. Okay, if it belongs to 2 people and each one wants specifically his own challah, so each one wants his own challah. He doesn't want it to get mixed up with someone else's challah. The same if it belongs to 1 person, but it's 2 different kinds. One is made out of rye, and one is made out of wheat, or one is made out of gluten-free flour. the person, the owner, doesn't want them to connect to each other. It doesn't want them to be close to each other, so they don't become together as one. And that's the two rules we see. First, they need to be somehow close to each other, and second, we need to it's fine with us, with the owner or the person who the challah belongs to, that they become close to each other. If it belongs to two people and they don't want it to come together, or even if it belongs to one person and he doesn't want it to become together, it doesn't become together. Okay, that's the rule we see from the Mishnah. Now, after we have a challah that we say, okay, it's fine. We want to connect. Okay, both of them are the same kind. It's very, very common in matzah. In Israel, I used to bake matzah every year. Every year since I think I was 12 years old, I used to bake matzah. And the way you bake it, I think, about 2 pounds together of flour. Each time, you work very, very fast. It's very hard dough. You can't make more than 2, maybe 3 pounds at the same time. So you make a lot of matzot. And at the end, somehow we want to combine all of the matzot together and take challah from them. So how do we do it? And here, obviously, it belongs to one person. It belongs to one group, all of those matzot. All of the matzot are the same kind. Okay, same flour, same taste. All of them have the same flavor in them. We don't mind if they get mixed up, touch each other. We don't care about it. So the question is, how do we combine them together? So the Mishnah in Challah says that one who does a small dose of challah, he does small dose, he's exempt, he's patur, okay? He's exempt. Unless they bite each other or cling or touch each other. Okay? Unless they stick to each other, they stick together. If they stick together, so they are considered already one dough. Even when they stick, they don't really need to stick strong. Even if you can see what is the first one, which one is the second one, but as soon as they stick together, they're considered as one dough. Rabbi Eliezer says, and the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, even if they don't stick, okay, even if we put them in the same basket, so the basket joins them into challah. And so even if we put 2 different doughs, a few different breads, even after they are baked, we put them into one basket, the basket reconnects them into one big dough, and they are obligated in challah. So in matzah, when we bake matzah and we bake small amounts of matzah, so we have different doughs. Each one is the same dough, the same kind, the same taste, but it's just small doughs. After we bake the matzah, somehow we'll get to it soon. We put it as if in one basket, and then we take challah from that. Okay, so Shulchan Aruch, and I won't read the Shulchan Aruch inside. I'll just go over the 3 options of combining them together that Shulchan Aruch mentions, and that's maybe clinging or sticking, okay, touching each other, the 2 doughs touch each other, that they stick to each other. That's one way to combine them. The second way is in a basket. Okay, and let's you can see here I put a line under in the basket. We have here a drawing, okay, a picture of bread in the basket, and you can see some of the breads are out of the basket. Obviously, they don't connect together to the breads inside of the basket. If you look carefully, even in the basket, I'm not sure if you can see the mouse. Can you see the mouse or no? Yeah, you can see me moving the mouse. So there's this piece of bread here, which it's totally out of the basket. It's above the basket, but it's totally out of the basket. We have some breads here which are long, and they go into the basket, so they are combined together. But if some of the pieces of the bread are totally out of the basket, they do not combine together to be part of the whole group of chalot, and they don't count as being part of the challah. We can't take challah from that. Okay, that's important halacha. And we'll bring it soon into practice. Just a moment, we'll bring it into practice. And another option is covering it together. Okay, we cover it with a mat. We put it on a table. A table isn't like a basket. Okay, it doesn't have any walls around it. But if we cover all of the doughs together, okay, or all the bread together, they become to be as if they are one dough, and then they are obligated in challah. So we started this class with an example from my wife baking many cakes last year for Purim, for Mishlochei Manot. Each batch didn't have a lot of flour in it. The same thing with matzah. Okay, that's what we do with matzah. So we put it on a table. We cover it with a cloth, with whatever. We cover it with something, and then all of them are considered as one challah. Okay, so covering is a good solution when we have many batches, which each one of them for itself is exempt from challah. And here we have a question which is probably more common. Okay, what happens when we have different batches, different breads, or different cakes, and we put them in the freezer? Now, it's an important question because I'm sure probably all of us, if we go into the freezer, most of us, we will find things that we baked. We have challah we baked. Maybe we have one challah we baked, plus one cake, plus a few cookies that we baked. Now, all of them together are inside this freezer. Is this freezer like a basket, which combines all of them together, or no? Okay, so that's a question. It's a very common question since we use the freezers a lot today, and if we bake and separate challah, we bake big amounts, big quantities. We don't bake every week. We just bake and we leave it in the freezer for a few weeks. So there's a freezer, combine and everything together. So on one hand, the freezer is a container. It's closed. Okay, it's a container. You can say it's like a basket. That's on one hand. On the other hand, it's not really a container. It's part of the house. It's connected to the electricity. It's too big to move and carry. You can call it maybe like another room inside the house. And we said at the beginning, to reconnect, we can't together two doughs or two breads in order to be obligated in challah. They need to be in one basket, not in the same house. That's a question. So it's an argument between the rabbis, our day's rabbis, and the halacha is, in such a case, to separate challah without a blessing. Okay, it's a common solution when we have a question and we don't have a definite answer to it. So we'll say, let's separate challah, just do it without a blessing. Okay, separate challah doesn't take long to separate it. A blessing, since we aren't sure if we should say, we don't want to say Hashem's name in vain, so we separate challah without a blessing. Now, before all of us get too nervous and say, oops, we have many things in the freezer, and maybe we should separate challah from it. So we should remember what we mentioned beforehand, and what it says here at the end of the slide, that it can be counted as one, it can connect together only if it's from the same kind. Okay, only if it's from the same kind. As soon as we have a few different kinds, and in my point of view, I don't want it to touch each other. I don't want it to connect. Okay, I have mint chocolate chip cookies and banana cakes. The taste doesn't go. I want each one to be separated and to have its own uniqueness, so it doesn't connect to each other. And that solves quite a lot of questions we might have, since usually when we have things in the freezer, usually we will have small quantities of different types of bread or different types of cake. Okay, so I'm going up a second, and here I don't think for the Broter Rama. Okay, that's we'll see soon. Okay, so we'll see soon one kind. Okay, we'll see one. So I skipped again. So before we go into the next session of what recounts together, so we said when we have two doughs of one kind, okay, two doughs of one kind, that can each dough on its own is not obligated in challah. It's a small dough. It's not obligated in challah. If they are connected together, so they are obligated in challah. And we said what can make them connect together, join together. We said all when the doughs touch each other and stick to each other, or when the doughs are in the same basket, or the third option, when we cover it together with front covering. And we ended the slide here that it connects only if it's from the same kind. And let's go now into what we mean by the same kind. Okay, does it have to be the same kind of wheat, the same flavor? What do we mean? What is one kind?
Rabbi, hold on one second. Before you go in, because I'm finding this rather fascinating and a little scary. When you're making bread, I understand we separate, and I understand that it's a quantity of flour. I get it. I understand there's a time to separate. There's a time to separate and make a bracha. Are you saying that if I'm making cakes, that I'm obligated to separate from cake?
Yeah. So this was the last class.
Kind of freaking me out a little bit here.
So generally speaking, I'm hoping that Ricky will be able to join us, depending on the time. As I said, she
I
finished.
may not be able to stay for the Ricky part of it.
Yeah, but generally speaking, yes, we do take challah from cakes. We do take challah from cakes. I'll stop sharing the screen a second, and I'll try to quote the Shulchan Aruch. We do take challah from cakes, but when's the last time you made a cake from, let's say, 2.5 pounds of flour?
Let's say you're making for a 3-day Yom Tov or Rosh Hashanah, or you're having, in other words, I could see where you're building different desserts and making cakes and cookies and all sorts of things and putting them in your freezer. Each one might not be 2.5 pounds of flour, which is a lot of flour. But if you're doing a lot of desserts for a Yom Tov, for a party, I could see where you'd have a situation where you have more than 5 pounds of flour in desserts or cakes in your freezer.
Yeah. So in that case, as you said, you might have a lot of kinds of flour. That's why it might sound scary, as you said. It sounds scary. I'm sticking at everything in the freezer. The freezer maybe joins all of them together. But we said, and we'll just go to it in just a moment, that it joins together only if all of them are from the same kind. They only if all of them are from the same kind. Which
Let's
means
say it's all white flour, but it's different types of cake. One's a banana cake, one's a chocolate cake, but it's all white flour.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And as we'll see in just a moment, it's considered two different kinds.
Perfect. Okay, so that
we can
protects me right there.
Yeah, preview. It does happen when we do make a lot of cake from the same kind. Okay, especially now towards Purim, if you're making your homemade mishloach manot and you're planning to give to many people, so it might happen. So it might happen. It's for cakes. It's relatively rare. Cakes relatively rare. In the army, we used to even have a separate challah from pancakes, because who makes pancakes with 2.5 pounds of flour? You're in the army, you're making hundreds of pancakes, so you do it. Also without a bracha, for a different reason. But yeah, so as we said, it might sound scary. As we'll go to it just a moment, we'll see that it isn't scary as we think, since the chalot need to be from one kind, and we'll see now what is considered one kind. Okay, so let's share the screen again. And yeah, so what is considered one kind? One kind of flour, one belongs to one person, different flavors. What is considered one kind? Yeah, and we'll start again from the Mishnah, and then we'll go to the Shulchan Aruch, who will be more specific. Okay, so the Mishnah here starts to talk first about kinds of wheat. And the Mishnah here brings a list of wheat. We won't go deep into it, or grains, that wheat and barley are two different things, and kusmi and bakwi. Barley, and we have other kinds of the 5 grains. So that spelled, okay, the Mishnah talks about that. So you can see for sure, if we're using 2 different kinds of flour, that's for sure two different kinds. What about if we're using the same kind of flour? Okay, but we're doing different spices, or it belongs to different people. So what about that? Let's go into the Shulchan Aruch. Again, here I won't read it, but the Shulchan Aruch said, and we mentioned it a bit before, and that's why we'll go over it a bit faster. If it belongs to 2 people, okay, if the dough belongs to 2 people, and they make sure that each one gets his own dough, they don't recount together. They don't connect together, even if they touch each other, even if they're in the same basket. Okay, but that's if it belongs to 2 people. We're now more interested, what if it belongs to 1 person? And here the Shulchan Aruch continues, what if it belongs to 1 person, but it's two flavors? Okay, so if it belongs to one person, I mean the Shulchan Aruch, I'll read it in Hebrew and translate it while I'll read, so I won't miss by mistake any part of the Shulchan Aruch. Hayu shneim shel ish echad. Both of those belong to one person. Im mishnei minim hayu, if it's from two kinds of wheat, en mitztarfim, they don't combine together. Ve'im haya, if it's from the same kind, okay, ve'im haya makpid shelo tiga isa zo bezo, velo titarev, even if it's from the same kind, but he really takes care, okay, that they don't touch each other or don't mix up. Like the example you gave, I make a banana cake and I'm making chocolate chip cookies, okay, well, whatever it is. I want each one to be separated. I don't want them to touch each other. I don't want them to mix up. So the Shulchan Aruch says they don't connect together. Okay, they don't connect together. And the Rama, okay, the Rav Moshe Isserich, the Ashkenazi posek on the Shulchan Aruch, he says, even if it's just a matter of spices. For example, I'm making two breads. One of them has za'atar inside, and that one doesn't have za'atar inside. Okay, they don't connect to each other. Even if both of them are breads, okay, but just one has this kind of spice inside, and the other one doesn't have any spices inside. Also, then they don't connect to each other. Okay, because I want each one to be separated, and I don't want them to touch each other. So even if they touch each other, it's by mistake. I don't want that to happen. I want each flavor to stay for itself. That, I think, gives us a breath. Okay, we can breathe out now and say, okay, my freezer is fine. Even if I stock for 3 days of Yom Tov, even if I have many, many kinds of cake, since it is many kinds of cake, so I don't need to separate challah, even if the freezer somehow connects them and makes them as one. So that can give us a breath. Any question before we go to the next and last topic?
No, good.
Okay, so go to the last topic, and that is the opposite. We started with a big dough, but it will be separated. Okay, we started with a big dough, it will be separated. And before we go to the halach, we have to explain something which is special and unique about the mitzvah of challah. In most of the mitzvah that depend on land, so the moment of obligation depends on where the plants grew and when we pick them, somewhere there about the process of picking it. In challah, what makes the obligation is kneading the dough. Okay, so kneading the dough together, or in the language of the halacha, mishat gilgul, when we mix the flour and the water together, that's when the challah, the dough becomes obligated in challah, which means flour as itself can never be obligated in challah, flour on itself. And here we have a question. What if the dough was needed in the mind from the beginning to be separated, okay, in a way that each part will have less than the minimum amount for challah. Okay, so let's say I have 5 pounds, and I'm having in mind to divide these 5 pounds into 3. Okay, divide it so each part will have less than 2 pounds, and obviously it will have less than it. Do we say is the challah obligated or no? Okay, so that's a question. It's not a super common question, but it does happen sometimes. So I brought it here just so we know. It's more common in Israel. In Israel, separating challah is a thing. Okay, separating challah is a thing. Many women will go, and there will be an evening for women, and there will be a rabbanit, and they'll make a dough of challah, and they'll separate the challah, and then each one will make her own challah. The many times, if they want to save the money and the work, they'll bring only 5 pounds of challah for 3 women. Okay, and they'll be doing challah together, and then each one will take the dough and do the challah to make her own challah, and then bring it home and bake it there, or even bake it the place where they're doing it. But each one gets her own dough. Okay, so that's here the question: is this case is obligated in challah or no? And so it's maybe not so common here. It's a bit more common in Israel, but we should know it. So let's go into it. So the Mishnah talks about a baker who makes a big dough, in order to afterwards divide it as yeast dough, as he spread yeast dough to different people. He's obligated in challah, and the Mishnah brings a reason, because if he will not find someone to buy it, he'll just make bread from all of the dough and sell it. But any other person, and here comes the important part, who makes dough in the mind of dividing it while it is dough, okay, while it is dough, so it is exempt from challah. Okay, so we can see here.
Okay, Rabbi, hold
Yeah,
on. So I personally make challah, and I make I make 5 pounds. I make the amount to separate and make a bracha. But I know that I'm not making one big 5 pound challah. I'm making eight challahs out of the 5 pounds.
yeah,
It's the one dough. I own it. It's my dough. And I have in mind, I'm going to make eight challahs out of that dough.
yeah. So that's a common question. That's a common question. Um, so we'll give the answer, and then we'll go into it.
Yeah.
It's obligated in challah. Okay, it's obligated in challah. You can do Hafrashat Challa. When we say here divided, okay, and it will say later, it more specifically because the Mishnah doesn't specify it so much. When we say divided, means divided to different people. Okay, divided to different people. That's the meaning of the Mishnah. We'll see it soon in a more clear way. If I take one big dough and divide it to small chalot, and all of them are for me, okay, or so it's obligated in challah, and we'll see it soon a bit more specifically. Okay, so that's the this is a Mishnah, and the reason for that is, as we said, what makes challah obligated in challah is the dough. Okay, the dough, when the dough becomes a dough. So if I want to divide it while it's a dough to different people, so it's exempt. Okay, if I divide it while it's dough to different people, it's exempt from challah. It's for example, once we did we bought once from Ricky just doughs of challah. Okay, we just bought challah dough and we baked it at home with kids. So that's an example where we buy dough from someone, and we take dough from someone, and someone has a big dough and he separates it into small quantities and he gives the dough to different people. Okay, and here Bruce brought in English the Shach and the Taz and many other rabbis, all of them almost apart from one known rabbi who argues, but I'll read here just this part here. The dough is divided in order to give the dough to different people. Okay, if I give the bread as baked bread to different people, it's obligated in challah. If I divide it to make different challah for myself, it's obligated in challah. The only case where it is exempt from challah is when I'm giving the dough to different people. And let's take the example from Israel. Let's say we're having an evening for Hafrashat Challa for women. Okay, and let's say we make 10 pounds, and we have 10 women. Each woman will get 1 pound of dough, and she'll make the dough to one challah. Okay, so since we take the dough as dough, and we divide it as dough to different people, this dough is exempt from challah. Okay, it's exempt from challah, and it doesn't happen here so much, but it might happen more in different places. And it might happen in more different places. What's more of a more common thing that might happen to us? I'm making one dough for myself, okay, but I'm taking the dough and I'm making it into two different flavors. Okay, sometimes it's a Thursday night, we want to make a fast meal for Thursday night, and we're thinking, okay, it's just before Shabbos, let's also make something for Shabbos. And we make two different kinds of dough, and we don't want them to mix and touch each other. For example, from the same dough, we make pizza and yeast cake. Maybe it doesn't really go together, but we decided to save time and to make pizza dough and yeast cake. So since I'm dividing it as dough, and each dough, I don't want the dough to touch each other, okay? I don't want it to mix with each other. The fact that for a few minutes was one dough doesn't make any difference. It's as if from the beginning it was two doughs. Okay, as if from the beginning it was two doughs. And that might be a bit more common, so it's worth it to know, but that's for that. So let's just go over it again, and then we'll almost end. If I'm making a big dough and I want to divide the dough as a dough to different people, then it is exempt from challah. If I'm lacking one of those things, like I'm dividing bread, I'm making bread and giving chalot to other people after it's baked, then it's obligated in challah. Okay? Or if I'm dividing the dough but for myself, then it is also obligated in challah. And we said a special case where from the same dough, I want to separate into two different flavors, and I don't want it to touch each other and to mix up with each other. So then it is exempt from challah, because this is like two different people. This is the last slide for that. There's one with halacha which I didn't write here, and I'm not sure how much it is common, but it can be common. Let's say I have two doughs, each one of them is a big dough, each one of them is 5 pounds. I can, if I want to, I can take challah from one of them to be challah for both of them. Since each one is obligated in challah, so I can take challah from one and have it in mind also for that one. That's for that. Any questions?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
I
great.
have one.
Yeah. That's...
Can you re-obligate the challah like when you do Hafrashat Challa with many women?
Mm-hmm.
And it's one dough. You've made the dough, and each person gets their own dough. It's less, say it's a pound, but everybody wants to, put their doughs back together. Like in other words, the original dough was not separated, and there was no bracha, right? And then you give all the doughs out. We're all around the table.
Yeah.
Can we, all 10 women put their 1 pound back together and then separate and make a bracha?
So
In other words,
if I want to understand the question correctly, you have one big dough. I take the challah and then I want to put it back together in order to.
So that all the women can have a part in the separating and making a bracha.
Making a blessing. So it's an interesting question, and the Achronim talk about it, and the Shach, one of the Siftei Kohen, one of the known Achronim on the Shulchan Aruch, he says you can't. I'll explain soon in a moment. And he says, and many tzadkaniyot women, like my mother, my mother should live, keep away from those things. Okay, so the Shach said that you can't do it. And the truth is, you can't, according to what we learned. Doesn't matter if each one took their own piece, or if they didn't take their own piece. Okay, since this dough was made in order that each one will take their own piece, and in a few minutes, each one will take their own piece. Okay, so it's as if we have, let's say, 5 small doughs of 1 pound. The fact that the doughs are here now together, and you can see it in one container, it's only an illusion. Okay, but since the goal of the doughs is that each woman takes her own challah and makes her own challah and bakes her own challah herself, so the fact it's now together, it's an illusion. The only case where it will be obligated in challah, and then they can do 1 bracha of Hafrashat Challa, not more than that, not each woman, but they can do 1 bracha of Hafrashat Challa, is, let's say they take the dough, they separate it, okay, to 5 different pounds, and each woman makes a challah and bakes it there, okay? But they don't really care afterwards who gets what, okay? They don't care if it mixes up. They don't care if I take yours and you take someone else's. Each one bakes a challah just because it's easy and convenient, just to knead and to how do you call it? The word is when you make the challah itself, not braided. Yeah,
braided.
It's easier to braid 1 pound and not 5 pounds. So if the whole reason they're doing the separating it just because it's easier to braid it, and in the end they'll bring it together and each one will take whatever challah they get, and they don't really care who it belongs to. So then it's considered as one challah.
I'm referring to like the Shabbos project, when all the women got together and in order to bake challah. So what happened was I think actually Ricky was the one that prepared the dough. And the whole idea was that each woman who probably never bakes challah was to put their challah together in such a quantity so that they could all be obligated in separating challah. But you're saying that that's really not correct.
If each one got, let's say, at least 2.5 pounds, or for sure 5 pounds of challah, so obviously she can say a bracha.
Okay.
But if each one got let's say less than 2.5 pounds of challah, Okay, and then the baker at home. Okay, each one each woman has her own challah. That's her challah. She doesn't want to mix with other doughs. The fact it came from one dough doesn't make any difference. But the only thing you're saying is it came from Ricky, right? And Ricky is a baker. Okay, she's a baker. If, let's say, for example, in a baker we have a special halacha, because if, let's say, Ricky prepared challah for 100 women and only 80 women came, so Ricky will say, okay, so I'll take 20 pounds and just bring them back to the shop and sell them as chalot. I'll bake them and sell them as chalot, which means from the beginning, the chalot weren't really separated, because from the beginning, Ricky had in mind that if I have to put them together, I'll put them together. Okay, the fact you can see that the mind plays a big role. Okay, the mind here really plays a big role. And if from the beginning we had in mind to separate it, so we separated. But if from the beginning we said, if we prepared for 100 women and only 80 come, so we'll take it back to the shop and bake it as challah and sell it as challah, so it's obligated in challah. That's a special case only for bakery. But as we said, as you said, usually when we have those big events of baking challah and each one gets a small quantity, it is not so sure that we can say the blessing of Hafrashat Challa, especially when each woman gets her own challah, she bakes it at home, and she doesn't want her challah to mix up with someone else's challah.
But how so in other words, the reason why we're doing this is pretty much kiruv. That's number one. Number two, when are you obligated in the separating of the challah? So if you've separated the dough, it starts out with clearly a quantity that you need to separate and make a bracha. But you don't. Mm-hmm. Then you hand each woman a pound. Let's go with the 10-person example. Yeah. Each of the 10 has a pound, and they take their pound and they put it in the center of the table with their hand on it, and they put it together, all the dough's touching, but it's owned by, it's each individual person, and you're putting it back together in order to make the quantity to separate and make a bracha. So clearly, at some point, you would think that a bracha would have to be said, but maybe only one person says the bracha.
So in a case like that, in this specific example, when we make 10 pounds, okay, and the idea is to separate the dough, and as soon as we separate it, each woman wants her own dough. Okay, as soon as she braided the challah, she doesn't want to.
No, she hasn't braided it yet. She's still, in the meeting.
She'll braid it in 5 minutes. The fact she will braid it in 5 minutes. As soon as, so from some point there, when it's still a dough, okay, she doesn't want the challah to get mixed up with someone else's challah. Okay, from some point there. If they don't care at all, and they'll just put everything together, like in matzah. Okay, you make matzah. You don't care about the matzah. In the end, you want give me just a pound of matzot. Okay, I don't care if it's I made the matzah, someone else gave me. Just give me in the end 5 pounds of matzah. So they all connect together. But here, since there will be a point where we separate the dough as dough to different people, and from a specific point, each woman will care and mind if a dough mixes up with someone else's challah, so all the challah are not obligated in challah. It's not obligated in challah. If each one gets a pound, the correct way to do it is that at least one woman has 2.5 pounds, or even better, 5 pounds. That's the correct way to do it. And at least one woman is obligated in challah, and then she'll say the blessing, and everyone will say amen on that case.
That's a good idea.
That's solution.
You have to be so you have to be very careful about these large events.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to really know the halacha on who says it, when you say it. Yeah, I think it's a little tricky there.
Yeah, there's something a bit ironic that in the big events of Hafrashat Challa, and it's done for clear. Sometimes it's not done in the correct way. It happened also in the past, by the way, and also the Shach and the Taz and Bach and other rabbis discusses certain cases where there's a baker and he sells halal to different women and he gives them 2.5 pounds, and each one wants their own mitzvah to say challah, so he doesn't do it. Can it happen or can't it happen? But in this case, where each one gets a small piece of challah, so you can't do challah each one. As I said, only if we have a solution of one woman being obligated.
Lastly, is the problem really saying a bracha levatala? Is that the problem?
Yeah, look, you can always take a challah and say harei zo challah, okay, and it's not really challah. If it's exempt, so it's exempt. Okay, it's exempt from it's exempt. There can be maybe small problems if we took challah by mistake and it's not exempt, but I think in cases like that it won't happen. The main problem we'll have is saying bracha levatala. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the main problem we'll have.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you very much. Hope we learned something new and relevant.
Thank you, Rabbi. I got to tell you, I'm sorry I missed your previous classes. I had some conflicts on Wednesdays.